Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 411, featuring Meats Meier, who I have known of actually for many years. He was doing gnomonology stuff back in the day when I was actually doing gnomonology stuff. So I sort of knew him through the gnome and stuff. But he's also a very talented person, very talented and interesting artist. Who I actually got to meet for the first time at THU, and we were going to do a podcast with him at THU, but then it turns out that he was not, we just couldn't get the schedules to work. But since he actually moved out to Yucca Valley, which is sort of around the Palm Springs area, shall we say, or around Joshua Tree, it was really, I decided, well, I'm just going to go out and go check him out over there. So I got the chance to drive out to Joshua Tree area and record a podcast at his house, and we did it in a video format. So you guys should really check this out on YouTube. Really fun. Kristen, Meats is a very interesting person. What did you think of the podcast? Did you watch some of the video a little bit?
Yeah, I watched the video. It's actually a fun one, so you all should watch it on YouTube. You get to see it in his on his front porch in Yucca Valley. So that was a fun. He gives us a little history of how he moved there a few years ago, inspired from Alex at Gnomon, and then get to hear about how he got into Hollywood via ILM and virtual production on Obi-Wan Kenobi and Avatar: The Last Airbender. And then you guys get into AI, and I'll let you kind of discuss
Yeah,
that.
for sure. He is, like he said, he is actually doing a lot of stuff in virtual production, has been working in virtual production and LED wall spaces for a while. He's just starting a new job over at Eyeline Studios, which is part of Scanline. And he's going to be a virtual production supervisor there. So really excited to hear about that. But yes, we do talk a lot about AI. He has been one of an artist that has been sort of outspoken in that area. He loves it as a medium and has embraced it as a medium. That in itself has become very controversial. And he's owning up to that controversy itself. I try to ask him some very tough questions because I think that, there's a lot of people that have issues with AI art. And I think that those questions need to be addressed. I was curious to hear what his thoughts are. I would love to hear more people talk about this subject, especially those who are having issues. I know there's some lawsuits that are being brought against some of the software companies that are developing some of this AI technology, and I'd love to talk to some of the people who are around that and some of the things that are going on. So this is a subject that I have very passionate to talk about. Love to get people to discuss it. And I know that it's been hard for some people to actually come forward, but I do want to thank Meats for being able to discuss it and come on board. I did not go easy on him, but I also want to make sure that we talked about a lot of the things that he's been excited about in this medium, because I think that's fascinating and something that we definitely need to be paying attention to, especially in terms of how it affects us in terms of technology. But yeah, definitely check it out. And as well, obviously Meats is really cool. As you said, we actually did not record it in front of his house. We recorded it in front of his saloon. There's literally a saloon that they're building in the backyard, which is just crazy. So he's got a really great house. He's also building a stage where he's going to be doing his own sort of projections and things of that nature there. So he said it's going to turn into a great, Zoom studio in some kinds. So really cool stuff that Meats has been doing, and very excited to see what's happening there. So yeah, definitely go check out the podcast and in video form if you can to do that. So we don't have any particular products or events going on right this in the near future. So but if you want to check those, if you want to follow us, make sure to just go to chaos.com to see any product updates up there, or just go to chaos.com/events for any events that are going on. But if people want to know more about the podcast, Kristen, where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. And that is definitely something you should go check out. You should check out Meats and I hanging out in front of his saloon. It's a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun being up there with him and checking out all the cool stuff that he's doing. And of course, if you guys have other ideas or suggestions, such as another person to talk about AI art, we would love to hear from you. Our email is labs@chaos.com. Again, that is labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 411 with Meats Meiers.
Welcome to another CG garage where the chaos group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passe. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
All right, Meats, so I'm calling this an extension of THU because we tried to do it at THU. Couldn't make it happen.
Yep.
And then you told me where you live, and I was like, well, I'm just going to drive here and make this happen.
Awesome.
So I'm really glad we were able to do this. I've always, I've known your work for 20, 30 years, right? You've been doing this for a long time. I was introduced to you through people like Eric Hansen and Alex Alvarez.
Oh yeah, great people.
So I know sort of what's going on. So a couple things before we get started. First of all, where are we? Just explain to people.
So we are in Yucca Valley, California, which is like right on the border of Joshua Tree National Park.
Yeah. And so how did you end up here?
Oh man, the COVID, one of the beautiful parts about COVID, one of the only beautiful parts about COVID, I should say, is that all of a sudden it allowed us, my girlfriend and I, Misaki, to basically work remotely.
Right.
And so it's actually because of Alex Alvarez, you just mentioned him. He got a place out here and we stayed over one night. We woke up in the morning with a cup of coffee and just seeing the sun come up over this entire valley. I'm like, okay, we're moving here. And like literally like 3 months after that, we were here. It was just the strangest thing, like having to kick ourselves, but basically the neighbors are really far away. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere, so it's an ultimate place for us to just get creative and do our work.
Well, that's kind of awesome. But let's talk a little bit about you. You guys are both artists, right? Well, what's your background? How did you become an artist? And you have a very unique style of doing things. So let's sort of get into that background.
Yeah, I mean, well, I started out as like right after high school as a t-shirt designer and an airbrush artist. And so I used to do airbrush art for like bands, like the local bands in Salt Lake.
Right.
And some of my posters that I did for a band called One Eye ended up at this bar. It was a bar owned by this guy named Chris Johnson, who was starting up a video game company called Beyond Games. And so I was doing t-shirts one day and I got a call from him. He's like, hey, how would you like to design video games? I'm like, I'm there. And I walked in my boss's office and quit right then. And then, so that's how I got a job.
Did you know anything about computer art at that point?
Yeah, I actually did. He didn't know that though. Right. He just went purely by I need an artist. Oh, look, there's art in his place. And so he called me. And it just so happened that, yeah, my dad gave me like VIC-20, Amiga, all that kind of stuff growing up. He saw I had like interest in it, and so every time there's a new computer, he would get it for me.
Right. We
were poor as hell. Like looking back now, it's like those things were like $5,000 or $6,000. Like in today's money, I'm like, wow, that's pretty crazy that he did that, but it set me up for my entire life, Right. So he basically brought me in and said, hey, there's this new thing that I heard about that's called 3D, like Virtua Fighter just barely came out. So he's like, I'm a video game developer. He did all these Battle Wheels stuff for the Lynx. And he's like, I can see that this industry is going to be turned into 3D. And I'm like, what's that? But he's like, go to SIGGRAPH. There's a thing called SIGGRAPH. Go there. There's a bunch of different software and go and pick out what you want, what you think is good. So I ended up getting like the Wavefront Advanced Visualizer stuff.
So what year was this about?
This was like 92, 93, I would say.
Pretty early.
It was before the internet really took off. It was like, there was some internet stuff, but as far as getting information or learning, it was near impossible. You couldn't do it that way.
So he got you an SGI?
He got me an SGI, that little toaster looking thing, and said, here's the software. So I've got an advanced visualizer, which was stapled together all these different programs.
Yeah.
It was almost exactly like it is now with AI stuff, and we'll get into that later, but it's like all these different bits and pieces that kind of are starting to come together into programs. You can see it's almost exactly like that. So I just sat down. It was literally this many books. I sat there, I read them all. I'm honestly a dumbass and like not a programmer. I'm just pure artist, but it was so interesting to me that we could have these 3D things you could work on that you could turn around and see the other side of it.
Right.
You know, and at that time, like even it's like it was. We started out even before that SGI. We had like an Apple with. Oh, now I'm not going to think of the name of the software, but it's literally if you rotated the wireframe, it was another minute to draw the wireframe.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, just to kind of date myself how old I am, but that's kind of walking up the hill both ways. That was my wireframe thing.
Right.
And, you know, if you contrast it today where you have full screen 4K, real time ray tracing with global illumination, all that stuff with 20 characters on, it's
Right.
no problem. So it's kind of cool. I've been able to see this entire industry, you know, as it went up.
Right. So what was your so your first foray into this was video games, right?
Yeah.
And how long? And this was in Utah. You said you grew up.
This was in Utah, yeah. So I didn't even meet anybody that did 3D for about 2.5 years into doing it, like learning it. I didn't even know anybody that, you know.
But what's
existed
strange is that
could do it.
Utah actually had like a 3D.
Utah was the
was a weird little
birthplace.
hub in a lot of ways.
In
yeah.
a lot of ways, yeah. It's like the Utah Teapot that a lot of people hear about. That was
Right.
like the University of Utah, which
Right.
was just down the street from where I lived.
Right.
It was kind of the hotspot of a lot of that learning and information.
Yep.
And then, you know, so a lot of the stuff was happening from
Viewpoint
that.
was there, right?
So, who?
Viewpoint.
Yeah, they were. It was like in southern part of the state, I
Right,
think. I'm starting
okay.
to think, but long time ago now,
Long time
my friend.
Yeah.
Those are old
That's when you
days.
used to buy computer models, and it'd be like $10,000 for a skeleton model.
Oh
Remember
man,
that?
yeah, it was good money.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody knew how to use that stuff. I mean, basically anybody that could turn on a computer could go to Hollywood and, you know, get a job doing that.
Yeah.
That was my next stage.
So how did you do that? So how did you get into that?
So I put together like a demo reel of all the stuff that I've been doing, and I for some reason figured out 3D tracking, like in the
Okay.
early days. And so I tracked all this stuff and inserted my thing, all my 3D, you know, models and animations
Right.
onto the track stuff.
Right.
So I sent that out, like I went to SIGGRAPH like that year that I had it, and I just dropped it in the box. You know, it was in the VHS tape style stuff.
Yep.
You know, throw those in. And I got a hit from almost everybody that I sent it to. In fact, ILM flew me out to go meet with them.
Wow.
And so I actually had to like ride a motorcycle in that day from San Francisco into where they were. And it rained like crazy, and I didn't know it was gonna rain. So I showed up to the interview just soaking wet, just completely soaking wet. I sit down and there's like 12 people at this big table. And I'm a dude from Utah
Right.
that hadn't really met anybody that did any of this kind of stuff. And all I was sitting in this thing. Long story short, I ended up I turned them down and working for the orphanage. Which was an offshoot of,
Yeah.
it was the best and brightest from ILM that came to work, you know, that was kind of set up perfectly for me, whereas it was like, we want someone who's not just, you're the guy who makes ears or, you know, really specific. It
They were
was
more
more
generalist.
about, generalist things, like the more you know. And I was like a technical director for them,
Right.
which was a lot of like, what the hell am I doing here kind of stuff. What does a technical director do?
Yeah.
You know, kind of things. And I worked on Hellboy, Day After Tomorrow, and all sorts of stuff. It was
I worked
awesome.
on Day After Tomorrow.
Well, yeah, it seems like everybody that I know I've ever met either worked on Hellboy or Day After Tomorrow.
Right.
It's kind of a hot time for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so were you doing camera tracking, or is that your main focus, or were you
Well, not for
generalist?
that. No, just pure generalist.
Awesome.
So it was like I honestly didn't know what the hell I was doing, and you know, it was like throwing a baby into the water to teach you how to swim, and that's literally my. But you know, to me, it was like throw me in the water, but like, what is this? And, I love swimming. I realized I love swimming, so
Right.
as I didn't care, I just dove into that the same way I always did, and just figured it out, and got really super good at it.
Right.
As far as, you know, maybe I can say myself, but.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so what got you into the art? Because I also know a lot of what you do based on your creations and your own art, right? You're not just a technical director; you're an artist too.
I feel like I'm 98% artist, and then that 2% has to really struggle to do all these like near programming type stuff that I do.
Right.
But I was an artist. I felt like since like second grade, I remember like doing artwork and having the teacher say, okay, you're the guy who does the board that does every week you change the board, you know. And I became kind of famous in second grade as, that's the artist guy. I used to go to like my friend's house and my artwork was on his fridge. You know, like usually you're like, hey mom, here, I'm putting this up, but it was on somebody else's fridge when I was in second grade. I was like, wow, this is it. You know, I'm an artist. I always will be. So hopefully I always I will.
Yeah, and so what inspired you? Because you've got a very, listen, there's a lot of different kinds of artists out there, and there's different things that are going on. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are just redoing an anime character with a sword or whatever it is, right? You're not that kind of an artist. You're an artist who's like found your own thing. And it's a very unique style.
Oh, thank you. Well, I like to say now it's kind of like the AI thing now, where you prompt different artists. Basically, I was everything that was in Omni magazine. I don't know if you remember that thing.
Yeah.
Omni magazine like had all these killer artists like Giger and basically everybody's like all the cool, crazy sci-fi artist was in that. So as I turned the page, I did my AI training, of what I wanted. Like I remember as the early time then. And then from then on, it was basically, technology was kind of what drove new possibilities. Like I would find a new program that does a certain thing, and it would inspire this new kind of a way to do things, to go about it, and a new looks. And every time, like through the last 30 years, it's just like if something new comes out, like the AI, then all of a sudden I figured out how to use and harness that power. And that changes my kind of style in a lot of ways, because I kind of go with where it's leading me.
But your style has always been a reactionary style, right? Like you're always it's not necessarily about being pretty.
No, not at all. Yeah, I'm not proud.
Right.
At all.
Well, you should. You should be. The art doesn't always have to be pretty, you know. And
I agree with that.
And I think that there's an expression that's happened, and so you have a darkness to the things you do. You also have a very organic thing to it, right? It's Geiger is a good example. Cronenberg is another one that I think of when I think of your art.
Yeah, I used to call myself the organic mechanic.
Organic mechanic?
Yeah, so it's just like, it's kind of natural nature, but it also with some technical mechanics to it. You know, some real reality, mixed with the natural, I guess.
Right. Right. Now, before we get into AI, because I know we're definitely going to be talking about that. It's going to be a long and heated conversation. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about how technology has always been something that has influenced how you approach your style, right? Because I know you were doing stuff in Wavefront. But you did a lot of ZBrush stuff. You did a lot of other things. So all of these things have influenced how you've done. So tell us about some of the history of some of the moments in technology history that have said, okay, once this happened, then I could do this, then I could do this. Yeah. So what are some of those things that happen along the way?
Well, I remember with Maya, like when Maya 2 came out or something, a thing called Paint Effects came out.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so that completely inspired me to make this thing called Mother Nature, which was like basically a lady with like her hair was like a bush or a tree with all these plants and stuff on it.
Right.
Previous to that, you couldn't even have done that. Even if you had the idea, because of how long it would take and all the polygons that it would take, it just was impossible. But now there's this new tool that you could basically spray on all this stuff. So I'm like, what can I do? And so I'm like, oh yeah, it's a nature, I'm using that new stuff, like all these different tools that were automatically like flowers and plants. Like, what can I do with the flowers and plants? And it kind of led to that thing. And Duncan Brinsmead, the guy who invented Paint Effects, said, wow, this guy's using my stuff the way it should be used. Let me promote him, which is kind of always how it works, So I kind of try to pioneer and make something like solid and concrete, from that. And so the producers and the directors, the people that make that, like, are looking for that kind of thing. Like, let me finally show that, see, I had a good idea to make this, because look at what people are making. Right. And so he named me a Maya Master, put me up on stage, all that kind of stuff. And then they gave me the cover of Maya 7.
Right, I do remember that.
Every time someone had to load up Maya 7, in those days it took like 3 minutes to open it, they saw my artwork sitting there. I felt so bad for that year, and I did the cover and whatnot. Right. So that was one example. Another example is ZBrush. Yes. So when ZBrush first came out, it was 2.5D. It wasn't even 3D yet. And Ofer, Pixelator, saw some of the work that I was doing with his 2.5D stuff. I created some stuff some of my favorite images was purely 2.5D, which means that you place this geometry on the canvas, and it locks into the pixel technology, Pixol technology, volumetric kind of stuff.
Right.
And I used to make the craziest stuff with that. You place it on and it's done. You can't move it once it's dropped onto the canvas. So I'd make all these complex stuff with it. Again, using like saying, what can I do now? It's no longer polygon based. I'm dropping all this stuff on and creating these things and posting it on ZBrush forums. So from that, Pixelator had me do the cover of ZBrush back in the old days when there were actual packages for things like that.
Right.
And so I did that, and from that, Alex Alvarez saw it and said, "Hey, I'm looking for someone to like teach a class on ZBrush." So I should say real quick that from then they decided to go 3D, from then.
Right.
And so like, hey, there's no new technology. Now it's not 2.5D. You could actually take this stuff, and it's this new technology called subdivision surfaces, where basically you take something and make it more and more resolution, and every time you have more resolution, you can add that much more detail on it. So I was like, yes. And so I started working on that and posting things, and Alex Alvarez, the owner of Gnomon, called me and said, "Hey, are you interested in doing DVDs about ZBrush and teaching classes?" And I was like, hell yeah. And so that's how I came to LA. He brought me out here. I lived with him for a little bit. He took me under his wing, and I taught the very first ever ZBrush class, professional class, and did the first ever ZBrush DVD. So, things like that. Just any time that I can see something new happening, I dive in there and try to pioneer it. I mean, that's not even really what I'm trying to do. I'm just more excited about, look at this new thing. Phew, let me try this out. Like, let's see what this new thing could help me advance my own vision.
So this is probably about 2005 or so, 2000?
It was 2006, I think, when I started doing the ZBrush classes.
Right.
I think that was about around that time.
Yeah. Okay. Because I was doing V-Ray DVDs for him at the same time. So I remember he had it was Gnomonology. It was Gnomon Workshop.
Yeah, the Gnomon Workshop.
Gnomon Workshop.
Awesome.
And so I remember it. It was a big thing. And to me, as someone who did modeling before I did Concentrate Light, I did a lot of modeling, just the idea of a sculpting tool, the way that ZBrush was presented was
changed everything.
This changed everything.
It really did. I've always said that Ofer is from the future. I still kind of believe that he's just kind of releasing whatever our computer can handle for the time being. Like, okay, your computers are better now. Here's this old, the next thing that you can do.
Yeah.
Amazing. He really changed our industry.
Do you remember Alex used to model us creatures with NeRF patches?
Oh, yeah.
It's like trying to model a creature as a quilt.
Man, glutton for punishment there. Yeah. My goodness.
Yeah. So it was really amazing. Well, that's awesome. Okay, so ZBrush was the next big thing, and obviously you became a pretty big ZBrush influencer to a lot of people, and a lot of the things you're doing thanks to Gnomon, and that's. So what was the next thing that sort of like changed for you?
Well, it's virtual production was, I think, the next kind of thing. I started out, I worked for Jon Stewart, and he was trying to create a show that something could happen the night before. His writers that morning write it, send it to us, and within like 5 hours have the complete show. It's an animated show, kind of like the Daily Show, but pure animated, which was going to open up the possibilities. And so we worked for like a year and a half on trying to get that to work, and it never quite worked because technology wasn't quite there yet.
Gotcha.
He was a tiny bit ahead of his time.
Right.
And from there, I went to Fox VFX Lab, which is kind of, they really introduced me to kind of virtual production. And
was this with Glenn Derry?
Exactly. Yeah, Glenn. He's a great dude.
Yeah,
I love that
he
guy.
invented the term virtual production.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
He did that because he needed to find a different way to signify himself from the visual effects supervisor.
Interesting.
So it says virtual production supervisor as opposed to visual effects supervisor. So that was how it's we needed two different terms.
I didn't even know that.
So he came up with virtual production. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, they had a huge place, like 30,000 square foot place, like downtown LA. And so they did motion capture, all that stuff, and I just learned the hell out of it and enjoyed that kind of stuff. And then I worked with the people that would eventually become Happy Mushroom.
Okay.
And so Happy Mushroom are the people that did the very first Mandalorian, they were pioneering all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Really, it's like they all came down on set onto the volume, the virtual production like volume.
Right.
And okay, like what the hell are we doing? And they had to figure out a lot of stuff, you know.
Sure.
So it's not just them, but you know, it's like all you know, the other people that are working with them and whatnot.
Okay.
And so eventually we worked on this show at Fox VFX Lab called Mouse Guard for like 2.5 years.
With what's his name? Who's the director?
Wes Ball.
Wes Ball, yeah.
Yeah,
He's been
so-
on the podcast too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He's an awesome dude.
He's a super nice
man.
guy.
I can't believe he got a director job from doing a CG short.
Yes.
Like he, which is insane to me. Which
well,
was
Blankenkamp
really
did
inspiring.
the same thing, actually. If
Oh,
you think about
wow.
it. Blankenkamp did the short that ended up getting District 9.
Oh wow! Okay, dang.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I was super impressed when I heard about that, and he was, you know, young dude that's probably younger than me. I don't know.
Yep.
And he's, you know, in charge of this multi-million dollar like thing, Mouse Guard. But eventually, Disney bought Fox,
Yep.
and that killed that entire Fox VFX Lab thing.
Yeah.
Which was the biggest bummer ever. But it did give me a lot of training, you know, to where I was going to go.
Sure.
And so from there, once Happy Mushroom really got going, I'm friends with all the owners and stuff, and I worked with them for years. So they brought me on.
Okay.
And then, so I was like, I was the virtual production supervisor on Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Okay.
And so I worked directly with the directors, the production designers,
Yeah.
everything. Every single day I was with them. Like we were putting on VR headsets, fly around. You know, it was during the pandemic.
Sure.
So we did the entire thing completely virtually. It was
Mm-hmm.
rad. Like I couldn't even believe it, how fun that was.
Right.
And then after that, I did the unreleased so far the Netflix Avatar: Last Airbender live action.
Okay.
So that one's gonna be awesome. That's gonna come out. And I did a bunch of other random stuff. So that's kind of brings me almost to, you know,
Okay.
a bunch of other mini things. But yeah, it's about
Well,
right
so
today.
so let's talk a little bit about virtual production. Obviously, you know, the definition of, I used to fight people on the fact that's like virtual production
Mm-hmm.
is when you have, you know, everything in CG and then, you know, other stuff is in-camera VFX. But at this point, everyone's just calling it virtual production.
Mm. Yeah.
So I've stopped fighting that the thing. It's like,
Yeah.
let's just call it all virtual production. It's
Yeah.
fine. So do you consider LED walls and sort of like Avatar style virtual production two different things, or do you consider them similar?
I feel like they're the same. When you say Avatar, do you mean like the James Cameron Avatar?
Yeah,
Or-
so instead of actually having LED screens, you're just filming everything and you
Oh.
see it in camera, right? So you see it
Oh,
as
I
a virtual
see.
camera, right?
Okay,
There's no
gotcha.
wall or anything.
I do consider that the same thing. In fact, that's kind of what I'm making in my studio as
Yeah.
well. So it's like tracked cameras with a green screen. It's a great way to go, I feel
So
like.
let's talk about that for a little bit. What are you're building your own little virtual
Yeah.
experiment stage
Oh,
right
yeah,
here, right?
For sure, yeah. So when I bought this place, it had like an open garage, more or less.
Right.
You know, with a one little door, completely dark, no windows, anything. It's 1024 by 1024 square feet.
Right.
Just this open thing, and it's taken me about a year. It takes forever to get stuff done out in Yucca Valley, but I'm almost there. It's gonna have green screen, the track cameras, and a couple projection screens that I'm gonna use for like my Zoom meetings. You know,
Right.
so it's gonna have like a tracked webcam. The Unreal scene that's projected on the wall will shift as I move around, kind of stuff like that. I'm gonna have like I consider like the best like Zoom meeting room probably in the world, and I'm not kidding. It's gonna
Yeah.
be so awesome. So
Awesome.
kind of
Okay.
working on that.
All right. But this is a sort of a great place because you can just sort of experiment with all that stuff,
Man,
right?
Yeah, it's out here. It's the best move I've ever done. Really moving out to the desert. I live downtown LA. You know, like
Yeah.
through all the riots, through all that stuff. You know, I was in the thick of it. I would say, probably couldn't get a more hardcore place. You know, for 2 or 3 years that was happening.
Right.
All sorts of things happening. There's people out front of, or not people, but the National Guard was out front of my house with machine guns and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So anyway, just moving out here to the desert is probably like the biggest contrast I could ever have done in my
Sure.
life. But it's we just love it. It really is. It's an ultimate place.
Awesome. Okay, so what do you think about virtual production before we get into some of the other stuff? But what do you think about the virtual production and how it's changed the landscape of visual effects?
Yeah, it's. I feel like there's a lot to do with virtual production before it really gets super good. It's kind of like the buzzword now. There's
Sure.
there's a lot of limitations, but realistically, it's freaking amazing.
Yeah.
Like when you step on that set, on the volume, looking at a set that you created,
Sure.
and you forget that you're in the volume just as a person standing there.
Yep.
It's just mind-blowingly cool. And so it's right now, I think it's a kind of prohibitively expensive for most people.
Sure.
It's $100,000 a day, I heard, like to rent like a decent volume. So
Wow. Okay.
So it's, you know, it's got some learning, you know, some ways to go. I think it needs to drop down in price quite a bit. You know, there's needs to be much more smaller, you know, volumes. But as far as technology, it's just mind-blowingly cool. You know, especially the way that, you know, that we can design sets, that everything is adjustable. Everybody's in the meetings at the same time. So the production designer, the director could be having conversations, you know, to figure out everything, like the lighting, you know, everything could be worked on at once, you know.
Sure.
When you're starting to set it up, you know, you can set a certain thing and like, you'll have lighting that could be adjusted real time, you know. And so there's so many questions that get answered as you're setting this stuff up, and everybody has like the say as it's happening. Like, well, you know, maybe we should move that mountain over there because I'm going to want the sun to come up here. You're literally moving mountains and, you know, adjusting things like real time. You know, now at what time of day do you want it? Oh, okay, you know, it's golden hour 24/7 if you want it.
Right.
You know, it's really fantastic. I can't say enough about it.
Yeah, I think obviously the flexibility of it is kind of an interesting thing, but obviously, like you said, there's limitations. The cost is very expensive
The
right
cost,
now.
yeah, that's the number one.
And there's a lot of power requirements, space requirements,
yeah.
et cetera. But you can go to 6 different locations in one day.
Yeah, completely. I mean, the other hard thing about it is that it's not enough computer power yet to really get the realism that's needed.
Sure.
You know, you can do a lot of tweaks and stuff to get it looking good. Some things look good, some things don't. But at the end of the day, it's still just a computer screen that's wrapped around, you know, that needs to look completely realistic at all time.
It is.
So computer powered, like the GPU power needs to double and double again, I think, and we're there. And it's been doubling every 2 years. So I'd say 4 years from now, you're gonna have complete realism at all times.
Yeah.
It's just a little early now.
The thing that I've had an argument about for a while is that there's a limitation to rasterize rendering as well, and if when it goes fully ray traced, then you're going to have.
Well, it's not just that. It's like I think there needs to be a step up. Like, I don't know if you've heard of NeRFs, the neural radiance fields.
Of course.
Yeah. So I think that is going to be really the change, the big changes once they figure out how to combine that with other stuff. You know, it's like I think that's going to be the realism. That's the
NeRFs are basically light fields.
Yeah.
So,
so any way you look at it, I mean, you can.
But you also have reflections that can change. And
exactly. So that's the biggest key. Is now you can have like reflections, refractions, all that transparency, all the stuff that you could never have before with just scanning stuff.
The problem with NeRFs is that they don't move right now.
Yeah, it's early, but I've seen some little bits of like starting the animation for it, like figuring that out, and it really also just comes down to, you know, GPU power. Just that stuff needs to double and double and double again. Right. And right now, as far as GPU power goes, it's exponential. You know, it's like a doubling of a doubling. You know, is huge, and that's what's happening right now. Through my whole career, it was like this, but all of a sudden, it's tilting like this. You know, like the 4090 that I just got is just like amazingly, you know, fast,
huge
and
amount
good.
Of, but
it's just
and then microwave to like it's a lot of power to
get for sure. Yeah, yep. But yeah, so it's all about just everything needs to get faster. It's like no matter how fast we make stuff, you know, now we got to deal with people wanting more and more, so it stays the same.
Yeah. So when you were at THU, obviously you're showcasing a lot of the stuff you're doing in Unreal, and obviously we talked about that in terms of virtual production and how that's affected your work. What other stuff in terms of real time has that influenced some of the other things, like some of your art and things like that?
For sure, yeah. So I'm really starting to integrate the metahuman stuff. So I want to move into like the kind of like the real-time like interviews, things like that, using a virtual character.
Okay.
So I hate seeing myself on screen, so eventually I want to transpose my 3D character that can do whatever, you know, and look however I want him to look. You know, so that's kind of where I've been focusing, is like kind of like the real-time characters, like using motion capture, you know, that kind of thing. The real-time face tracking using the iPad, you know. So now all of a sudden I have like the entire like a performance capture now, like in my house right there, you know, facial capture the same time as I'm doing, you know, body stuff and hands, you know, so it's pretty amazing.
Okay, well, that's very exciting. Okay, so the other thing that got, you know, we starting to talk about at THU was obviously some AI stuff. Back then, and this was only in September.
Yeah.
But back then it was like, this is interesting. It's like, we don't know how this works. And since September to today, the issue has exploded. It is all over the news.
Expected.
There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot. I know that you're very much into it, which we'll get into some of that reason. But obviously, there's going to be a lot of controversy about it, which I'm going to grill you on, as you know. But I want to know, like when you started to see what this was, and you're obviously a very early adopter of a lot of technology, as we've already established at this point. What did you see? What was the thing that you started to realize was going on here?
Oh man, just to quickly backtrack, when I was at Fox VFX Lab, NVIDIA came and did a demo of us, and that was like 6 years ago or something. And they showed us style transfer.
Oh right, like
and
a GAN system.
Exactly. Yeah. So they explained to us neural networks. You know, I don't know why they're there or what they're doing, but they came and gave us a class, and I was like, holy moly, that's a freaking amazing.
Right.
And so over there's like 3 or 4 years where I was like, okay, now can I use it? You know, can I? And it's not quite there yet. You know, I couldn't do the processing on my own GPU at that point. So it wasn't until around January of last year, almost exactly a year ago, I would say.
Right.
The Disco Diffusion started popping up.
Okay.
And this program Disco Diffusion, where you could just text prompt, you know, and it would give you an image. You know, it was really rudimentary, but it was very obvious where it could go and what it would do.
Right.
And so I just instantly, the second I could, I jumped into it. So basically what you could do back then is use this thing called Google Colab that Google was providing all of their GPUs.
It was a cloud, is like a little cloud computer.
Exactly. Yep. So it's basically kind of a programming looking thing. When you first look at it, it's like, well, that's programming, you know, it's a programming language, and then the simplified version on the side where you enter your inputs. So I figured that stuff out just because I had to, because there's all this power waiting for me. So I jumped in there and figured it out. And then, so I just started like hammering on it, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so obviously this is the thing, right? It was like text turns into image, right? So based on your art and the thing you do, what are you entering as text?
Okay, so the very first thing that I did is to see how close I could get to my artwork that I currently do.
Okay.
So I was trying to explain it, you know, how like wiry metal things, and I got some surprisingly good results where I'm like, this is almost better than what I can do. So at that point.
Okay.
And the very second thing I did was start to like, okay, this seems almost too good to be true. This seems like it's taking art from other people. So I jumped in one of my favorite artists, Chet Zar. I took like his artwork, you know, off site, and I just tried to explain it, like, and I typed out Chet Zar, everything, like, let's see, you know, is it just stealing stuff from online and repasting it?
Okay.
And so I did that, you know, for the first couple of months. You know, Lori Lipton's another one I did over and over again. It got surprisingly good at her stuff, actually. Chet's wasn't quite there. It might not have, like, you know, at that point seen his stuff, but that was my very first thing I did. I just started making images, and then every time I'd make an image, I'd run it through the Google Lens or the Google image search.
Oh, reverse image search.
Exactly. So the very first thing, you know, it's like this stuff was taken from the web. So if you want to find the smoking gun, you know, does that constitute, like, did it get as close? Is it just stealing it? I didn't come even barely close to finding anything that was even slightly, you know, something that you could take to like a judge and say, hey, look, they stole this, because it wasn't even, you know, slightly similar. You know, so that was my first thing, is like, let me check out to see if this is real or like what's happening. Is this just, because it's so good that it just does seem like it's taking it straight from an artist, pasting it on there, you know. Okay. So I tried all sorts of stuff and things, a purple school bus with green ears on it, you know, like something that no sane artist would have ever done. And it was doing that perfectly, you know. So I started to feel better about kind of at least the sourcing of this stuff.
But it has been clear since then that it has been sourcing tons of stuff from artists, and has been scraping the internet and taking a bunch of stuff, and has had an effect on some of those artists, right? So for example, at THU, we spoke to Mark Simonetti, as you know, and Mark was talking about, like, everyone had issues. Now this is back in September again. Everyone's opinion has changed a lot, but back in his biggest concern is that his brand of his name is getting affected by people's crappy art that's trying to use his name, right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting because, I thought that was a great thing. You know, it's like I'm trying to learn, like listen and hear all these things, you know, from everybody and to get a complete 360-degree understanding of this. So that was a new one to me. And I'm like, okay, that actually makes sense. But when I got home from that THU, I must say, one of the first things I did is put a scene by Mark Simonetti, and he was wrong. It creates beautiful stuff that looks exactly like his artwork.
Right.
It has learned Mark Simonetti's beautiful color schemes, you know, the foggy stuff that goes back, and it looks fantastic. So,
but what about, how does that affect Mark?
Well, that's, I mean, at least for that concern's gone because it creates beautiful stuff.
So it creates beautiful work, but it also, but
as far as like affecting him, I wonder, I mean, is somebody that was going to hire Mark Simonetti for his exact stuff, would they just type that Mark Simonetti and to get his work? I'm not sure exactly.
I'm almost positive they would if they could afford it.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's going to affect everybody like that for sure.
Right.
I mean, but I don't have any exact, answers for it. Yeah.
But what, I mean, so right now there's obviously a lot of controversy. There's a lot of artists out there that are upset about this because they're saying that it's stealing. They're saying that people are profiting off their work without representing them, and a bunch of other issues. What are some of your positions on that? Like, what do you think about it?
Well, my position, I mean, I looked into it and really it's really not stealing technically because anybody that got scraped basically signed terms of service that goes in there. So there's this thing called the common crawl that all this stuff, anybody that's attached to this, mostly is attached to this common crawl. And so, but it's kind of worse than that because I think anybody that even signed up for like Amazon, like to have the storage, anything is part of that common crawl.
Okay.
So that's kind of, they sign the terms of service. If you look in there, like they're allowed to do that. So as far as like something that they could take to the courts, it probably wouldn't hold up at all, especially because
this is in terms of them just using their
it, yeah.
Not necessarily in terms of stealing it, just using their
the reason that is attached to that training model is because it's part of this common crawl that's going across, and
right.
So the other thing that I learned is that modern day artists are a small fraction of this. So I hear a lot that AI is stealing. It's really not. It's 100% stealing. So people are saying, but it's really not like 80% of it comes from like photo places. Shutterstock. Things like that.
Well, let's talk about
which
that.
I hate. I hate Shutterstock. So it's like,
but let's talk about all the photographers out there there's a lot of people that made a living off doing stock photography.
Yeah. In fact, like even Google searches, things like that's going to go away because of AI. A lot of stuff is changing.
Right.
I think this stock photo stuff. I mean, I'm not here to say that this is wonderful for artists at all, at all. I'm an artist. I don't want my stuff stolen as also. But I do think that really, if we were on a beach and I grabbed a handful of sand, or a pinch of sand, that's your contribution to this training model.
Right.
You see the whole ocean right here, this is your contribution. You're not, if this was gone, it would basically do the same thing. In fact, if all of the artists were cut off that were any digital artists whatsoever, it would still work fantastically beautiful. Well, the only thing you couldn't do is like name something somebody specific.
Okay, well then let's talk about that. What about all those artists that say they don't want to contribute to that?
Yeah, I'm 1,000% proponent of if somebody doesn't want to be attached to this, they shouldn't be. Like, that's just hands down. Like, if you don't want your art to be connected to all this stuff, there should be an opt-out thing. I think it actually would be better as well if most digital artists were taken out.
Do you think that the AI models out there, like the Stable Diffusion guys and the MidJourney guys, they don't seem to give a crap?
Well, I will say, so MidJourney, I'll agree with you. I stopped using MidJourney about 3 or 4 months ago. I completely took it off. I don't touch the stuff. there's a few things that guy said that were like, nah, this seems a little like I kind of just briefly read stuff, but already I was starting to feel like, the MidJourney's, I've always said, is like the McDonald's of AI. And it's unfortunate because when you say AI, most people think MidJourney, like that's AI.
Right.
That's just one guy, one little artist that's been trained on all this stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on elsewhere. But anyway, I stopped using MidJourney. It seems a little sketchy to me.
So what was the thing? What was the thing about MidJourney? Let's talk about that made you say that's a line that I'm not willing to cross.
Well, the first part, and it's mainly because it was just getting too damn good. I'm more of I want to make my style. MidJourney is how they've done it is they've started out, with whatever training data they had. But then when you make an item, there's like 4 different selections. And every time you select what you like in there, that's like patting it on the head and say, that's good. So that's adding to the training data.
Sure.
So all of the good stuff that was selected, and then all of the top images, that people start to really, use over and over again. Those are all like putting back into it. So it's training itself, and it's getting too good too fast. Okay. Anyway, so I'm not about that. So I cut all that stuff off. Plus, I saw in some interview that he said that he used a whole bunch of artists that he didn't have permission for or something. It was like really kind of a little too, I can't explain it, but like you're kind of a dick, and I don't want to help you out at all.
Sure.
And so you also mentioned stability, and I disagree about stability feeling that same way. I actually kind of, I don't say no, but I've been in like Zoom meetings, one-on-one with the owner, Ahmad, of Stability.
Oh, right.
And so I got a little bit of a relationship with him. Whenever I'm like doing a podcast or something, I'll ping him and say, what do you think about this?
Sure.
And I swear to you that he really does care. Like when he first hooked on with this, the Layon or whatever that does all that common crawl stuff, they said, we have this, you can use this thing that's like legal and signed, and you can use the data. People have been using that data for years and years,
To do lots of training.
For doing every possible, learning, training, all this kind of stuff. But now this AI has looked at it, then that's a whole new ballgame because he doesn't forget. He adds it into his, scenario. But so Ahmad, I honestly feel like he does care. And from what I understand, he did plan on basically taking ArtStation out of the scenario, completely taking it out.
Interesting.
So their new version, the 2.0 version, gave them the ability to, as he says, to be able to control what's put into the sausage, more or less.
Okay.
His earlier stuff, there was no control. 1.0, 1.5, there was really no control for that. And that was as it was coming out, and all of a sudden the groundswell of artists, understandably saying, hey, what the hell's going on? And a lot of that feedback comes down to him, and he's aware of it. And from what I can tell, I mean, who knows? But, it's a near $1 billion company valuation now.
Sure.
I don't know what's going to happen, but I got the impression that he sees, he understands, and that he is making moves to be able to change that and to make people happy. Because like as I was telling him, it's like this isn't how you want to start out this whole thing where people are with pitchforks, and if anybody uses it, they get the pitchfork. You want to set out, like, I think it'd be a wonderful thing for them as a company to be the 100% hormone-free, ethical, the company that really cares about artists. That way, all these artists are going to start using that.
Right.
And, bottom line, most of these artists that hate it are going to use it eventually. It's because they won't have a choice. It's being integrated into dang near everything, as it should.
Sure. But there's still some tough questions I'm going to have to ask you.
Do it. I mean, I might not know,
so right now you're looking at companies like OpenAI, which is not open, by the way. It's just a name. Not even close to being open. It just happens to have the word open in it, but it's not open because Stable Diffusion is open. Yeah. Right? It's an open source data form. I've downloaded their models and retrained it with my own data.
Yeah, yep.
And I'm sure you have done that as well, right?
Oh yeah.
And so that in itself is cool because you get to manipulate that concept or whatever it is. But it also means that you can train it on whatever you want. And even if you're a bad actor, you can do that.
Right? Oh yeah. But you can do that now in Photoshop.
You can.
Yeah, I can do exactly the same thing in Photoshop.
Right. Yep.
And anybody can that has any kind of, I could do it with a pen right now. I could take someone's idea, write it out with a pen, and try to make a T-shirt out of it. I'm still breaking copyright. I mean, these laws they haven't changed, and the same laws that protected people before AI are going to protect them now.
Right.
If somebody makes an image that is close enough to your IP or your copyright, take them to court. But you're gonna have to take that person to court that did it, and not the tool.
Right.
You'll never be successful taking the tool, because that tool did not make them break copyright. If you're gonna break copyright that close, you have to specifically try to do that. I could do that with a photocopy machine right now.
Right.
There's lots and lots of ways to break copyright, but it's really not the AI itself that's doing it. But this AI, the technology, will make it easier for people. Yes. There's no doubt about that. You don't have to have any skills, But realistically, though, and this is another thing that I've tried a whole lot, is like just using the straight up MidJourney, vanilla MidJourney, or straight up stability. You can't get close enough just by describing something, or even naming it, or even the artist name and describing it. It's still a blend of billions of parameters. And so that way you'll never really get exactly enough. Growing up, all being an artist this entire time, they always said, make it 20% different, make it 30% different, and it's yours.
Sure.
I've heard that 1,000 times by everybody.
But in the early days of some of these AI training things, people were getting images with the watermarks. What they were trained on.
I can explain why that is, actually, is because when it does training, think about if you were you've never seen the world at all, and all of a sudden you had 800 million stock photos in front of you with the word photo. Right. So you see all these things, and it's like, what is this? And it thinks differently than humans, so it looks at all those pixels. And so if it says it's a photo, it might have some kind of name kind of thing stamped on it. So photo equals the thing, and then little stamps. A painting might be the stuff, and then on the sides, the bottom left or the bottom right might be some things. And so it thinks that if you type photo, that, oh, it's this thing with watermarks on it. And so it puts these things on there. And I know for a fact it does this because I also do a lot of my own artwork thing, where there's a technique called image to image.
Right.
And basically you can take in any artwork, you put it in, and then you can say, change it, and you tell percentage. I want 5% different, 10% different, things like that. So I put in my own artwork and say 5% different, and then I would still get that on top of it. And I know I didn't put that on Shutterstock. Right. But I'd still get Shutterstock looking things on top of it. Right. So that, it's really not. So every time people bring up the Shutterstock thing, I'm like, okay, we'll run the image through in Google, Google Lens. Right. Is what you're seeing copied? And I've done that over and over and over again for people. It's like, okay, you can see the Shutterstock, so what's underneath it must be stolen, right? That makes sense. If it's put in a Shutterstock thing, that puts it on top of what's stolen.
Right. Now, let's go beyond that, because it's not necessarily that, it's not literally just putting a transparency and putting it on top, but it's been trained on things that are copyrighted, right? So there's a couple things to do. The people who are doing the training just say, okay, if it's got a watermark, I shouldn't use it. Do you think that should be the
well, I think that's actually what's happening. They have a kind of a filter, and in fact, with stability, there's a thing called negative prompts. And there's like built in, like, stop putting those things on, because they're making people think that everything is stolen. Right. But yeah, it puts it on my own personal artwork so often that I know that unless someone snuck in my computer and put it on Shutterstock, that it put it on there, I know it's never been on there. In fact, it's something I might have just made and put it on there, and then I'll get those watermarks on top of it. So to me, that's not a smoking gun at all. Sure. It's really about if you can find an actual piece that's stolen in it with a watermark on it, then that's the smoking gun, not just the fact that it has a...
I agree with you, but I'm saying more from the point of view of, if you're someone that say, okay, train on this data, shouldn't they be training the data and say, if it has a watermark, I shouldn't be trained on that?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. It's apparently to them, it's whatever's involved in that common crawl. They were legally allowed to do that. But really, like 1,000% honestly, I want this to be 100% legal, because I love the hell out of the tools that is coming out, and they're extremely powerful tools, and I don't want artists to miss out on that because of all this hubbub.
I agree. And we're
going
to get to all the potential in a second.
Okay.
I hate. I'm not going to only talk about this. I just want to get it out of the way, because people are going to get frustrated unless we talk about it first.
Sure. Yeah.
So that I think is true. I think there's definitely a problem. What do you think about the fact that it's so hard to have this conversation?
It makes fully sense. I mean, think about the thought of not just something taking your job, but using your artwork to take your job.
Right.
So it's a double punch.
Right.
You took from me and you took my job.
Right.
It's not just a new technology. So it's 1,000%, for sure. It's like, this has to happen. These conversations need to happen.
Right.
The conversations that you and I are happening, that goes online, hopefully will, help people understand a little bit in a different kind of way. But this stuff, I need court cases. I want full-on court cases to come up. I think that would be the best thing in the world. Bring this up. Let's see the legality of all this stuff. It's to me, I'm a weird outlier, I know, because it's like, here, AI, I have everything I've ever done.
Right.
You can have it, and what I get back is the entire world, the information,
right.
Every single style that's ever done. Every single beautiful piece of artwork that's ever been made is put in this training data that I have control over.
Right.
So to me, it's worth it. But and I know everyone doesn't feel that way. I understand that. But I just do feel like that having an AI look at your artwork and having it kind of take the data and make connections towards that. All the stuff that it does to blend in to become a bigger and better artist doesn't really affect that person, that human person. I don't think. I haven't seen yet that it's like someone was going to hire somebody and then they just typed in their name instead and got it. I'm sure it'll happen. I don't know.
Oh, I'm almost sure it's happening.
Yeah, we just have a lot to work out, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be worth it. Let's figure all this stuff out. Let's make everybody happy. Let's maybe make it so that if someone types your name in there in your training data, you get a little check in the mail. Right. A little micropayment. Things like that. Like
isn't that exactly what Shutterstock is trying to do?
Is that?
They actually, I think they believe that they're trying to partner with either Stability or OpenAI or something, so that it's happening.
That'd be cool.
If you're Shutterstock, your business model is in jeopardy.
Big time. Yeah.
So you have to adapt to this or die.
Yeah, I agree.
So not to say that. Now, one last controversial one, and we're going to get into some of the other stuff. Sure. Okay, so I think that there's been news recently that came out that OpenAI, based mainly on ChatGPT, not necessarily on any of the art stuff or any of DALL-E stuff.
Yeah, that's a whole new
they're suddenly getting an evaluation of $24 billion.
I heard 40, but yeah.
It was 40? 40?
I heard
okay,
40,
something crazy, all right? So that is an evaluation based on other people's data, right?
Interesting.
So my contribution has given this one person or this one company or a few people a huge value. How do you feel about that?
Well, artists have long, putting their artwork out there for other artists to learn from and to take from. That's been a pretty consistent thing. There's never been any royalties for that.
Yeah.
I know, a lot of people that have, taking pretty generously from other artists' styles, gone on to make artwork for that, and that, make artwork and then even getting jobs where they're getting paid lots of money. Right. So do they owe the people that they took from some money from that? It's all about whether you consider it stealing, scraping, or learning from.
Okay.
And that's humanizing it, I know, but I do feel like these things are going to help us eventually, if we use it the right way.
Okay. I agree that this is a completely new way of thinking about creativity that is going to be critical to where we move forward from.
Yeah.
So not just creativity in terms of art, but in terms of writing and everything. So I do honestly believe that. What about the idea of people getting hired on their portfolio based on AI art.
There's a lot to figure out with that. But at the same time, I don't think any sane person would hire an AI artist of something that was like a valuable campaign, or, you know, something where there actually was real money to be made.
Sure.
At least currently, you know, right now, it's anybody would hire, you know, a real artist that understands all composition and colors and balance and all these things that some rando might not.
I'm gonna help you in this argument. I've seen a lot of AI art. The best AI art I've seen are from real artists.
Yeah.
Because they understand composition, they understand better than most.
Big time, yes. I totally agree with that. And that's what I've always been saying to people is like, you know, this is an augmenter for what you already know.
Right.
It augments it, gives you more variations and more, you know, it takes you places that you'd never go before. You know, the AI doesn't have any kind of ego or embarrassment. It'll just do all these crazy things that nobody would ever, you know, have even thought of doing before.
Right.
So, you know, there's some real benefits to it, I think. And it's also, I've noticed that art directors, people that are art directors and have been art directors for a while, they are so good at it because they understand how to explain to somebody something else, you know, what they want done and how to take individual items, the best parts of it, and combine it into something great.
Right.
You know, so, and that's what everyone's kind of have to kind of reformat their brain, as far as I'm concerned too, is like, you're working, you know, you have helpers now, you know, and how do you use the help, you know, and how do you have to credit it?
I think the issue is that they have less need for help. Right, so they can hire fewer artists, etc.
Fewer artists, yeah.
And so they don't necessarily need that. I think there's a lot of artists out there who, you know, went to trade schools to learn how to draw.
$100,000.
$100,000 at some trade school, for-profit trade school.
Oh yeah, big time.
And those jobs are no longer available.
Yeah,
but
that happens throughout history. Always through history, there's times of big shifts. Right now, we're in that monumental shift, probably the biggest shift the world has ever happened.
Right.
You know, we have the internet now. We have complete communication with everybody, and all of a sudden, this new technology is set to not just take over artists, but pretty much everybody that does any kind of creativity whatsoever. Programmers, like doctors, even. You know, all these things are. You know, it's like all of a sudden, you can train the neural networks and machine learning to do anything you can teach somebody else, all of a sudden, you know, so we have this, you know, monumental shift. So it's not about is this good or bad, because it's happening. This is happening no matter what, no matter if artists get off ArtStation or if they write a bunch of mean stuff about AI, it's not going to matter at all. This is happening, you know, in a million different ways right now. So to me, it's all about, okay, this is happening. So how can I benefit from this and even keep my job, you know, realistically. So to me,
what's your advice on that? If I was, let's say, if I was some young artist, right? Let's say I'm, you know, 25 years old. I just spent, you know, $100,000+ at some trade school to learn how to be an illustrator. Yeah. And so now suddenly you see things like MidJourney happening. Yeah. How do you progress from there?
So I think the number one thing, I mean, that I always tell people is try to stay positive when the word AI comes up. So try to differentiate MidJourney from all of AI, because AI is just like a helper that no matter what it is, it could help you work with that. Okay. So really anybody that's going to be hired in the next 5 years is going to have a positive understanding of the new tools.
Okay.
So right now, the artists that I say that I can see going, no, I'm not, you know, digging their heels into the sand, they're stuck right there, because there's new tools that are happening that are going to invalidate what you've already known. I know it's sad, and I know, you know, you've gone to school and you've spent all these years, you know, making sure you can draw a circle perfectly, you know, things like that. You know, now it's considered doing it the hard way, you know. And if we're talking about production art, you know, production art's always been about doing it faster, doing it better, you know, doing more, and that's what this is going to allow you to do. So the artists that aren't going to jump on that, you know, the only way that you're going to be able to compete is if you jump in and you start learning a lot more styles. You know, a lot like it. You have to jump in there, because there's going to be some 12-year-old kid that is open to all this stuff, that has, you know, jumped in there and tried and done it. And I will tell you that, you know, MidJourney is one thing. You just type type out your prompt, and there's a lot of actual surprising detail of how to actually get what you want using words. There, you know, people don't want to hear that, but there's a whole world in there of a lot of little complex things that really change what you're trying to do.
Yeah, the semantics are very interesting.
Oh my goodness, that to me is just, it's really fun too. There's a game of like trying to explain to it to get what you want. And that's really near impossible currently to get exactly what you want.
Right.
And so what you find is that once you really start doing it the real way, under the hood, like stability and all that, have all these different web stuff, and there's a million. You'll look in there, and you might even take you a full day before you could even get something working.
Right.
You know, it's under the hood. It's the old switchboard. You know, putting that in that and figuring out what KLMS means, and you know all these weird. You know, it's as close to programming as you can get.
Right.
So I use this program called Visions of Chaos.
I use it too. Thanks to you. You told me about it.
And that's the most freaking amazing thing, because this guy takes all these different tools that are coming out, like the real tools, you know, there's like all the way.
It's the best way to test everything.
Yeah, instead of going in GitHub and installing things, all these piecemeal, it does it all kind of for you.
Right. Just to give people a perspective of what this is, it actually started off before machine learning, long ago, and it was a standalone program, free program that you could get that would create all kinds of fractals, all kinds of different things. And then it had one little subsection called machine learning, and that subsection has ballooned into this massive data
every
set.
cool program in there.
Anything
like
that's
super slow-mo, just like
image
style
restoration,
transfer.
Image restoration. It's even got the old ChatGPT, and this all runs locally on your own hardware.
That's the number one best part about all of this, and that's actually like using this kind of helped me to understand about that. We were going kind of go back about the thievery stuff, because really when you download these trained models, they're like 5 gigs to 7 gigs.
Right.
You can unplug the internet from it and use it. So basically it's not just like people have this idea that it's like just go, like you type something, it scrapes the internet and finds it for you. No, it's compressed everything that it knows from like 900 million different images compressed down into this little 5 gig package.
Right.
And then it's translated through this neural networks, you know?
Right.
So it's like little things that it's like, oh, here's what I kind of learned and what I remember, and now I'm going to translate it for this type thing, you know?
Right.
So that also shows me that no, it's not stealing your whole image off there. There's just literally no way it could fit 500, 800, 900 million images into this 5 gig thing. It's just simply not possible. But what it does is it remembers all these connections, you know, and that way I know that it could really never completely break copyright, because it's just a memory, a hazy memory, and a blend of 1,000 million different little things together is what you get.
Right. So okay, a couple things. What are you doing with it right now? What are the things, like the creative things that you're doing?
Well, the number one things that I'm interested in is like animation stuff.
Okay.
So that's one thing MidJourney can't do.
Right.
You know, currently I've heard that it's going to do all these things. So, but there's all sorts of amazing stuff with animation. Like one of the things that I love to do is there's a thing called thin plate spline animation.
Yeah, I saw that.
And that thing is so amazing, because basically you could take any footage of somebody talking and then transfer it onto a still image, and it fully, like, even the still image can be mouth closed, eyes closed, but it'll figure out what's inside the mouth and what's in the eyes, and you can turn your head, everything. It could transfer that animation or the speech onto, you know, your animated stuff. The other thing that I love to do is like kind of along those same lines, but it's like using like a metahuman, the Unreal metahuman. So you could animate the metahuman, but then say that's Tom Cruise. So it just redraws it, but with Tom Cruise's face. And so it really, I think, is going to help with that last little bit of realism. You know, that's the thing that we've always been fighting against, the uncanny valley.
Sure.
Is where you can get everything looking good, but it's just that little bit, it just looks fake, because something's always missing no matter what you do.
This is different than deepfakes.
It is different than deepfakes in that it's just like automatically created by like the stability or whatever, you know.
Sure.
So it doesn't need to be trained on that person. You just type like Tom Cruise or whatever, and it changes that person. You know, you say percentage, like what is the percentage? How close to the original? I'll give you some creativity, you know, so there's like basically a dial, and you can basically have, you know, your actors that way, you know, which is a whole like now actors are going to be gone. So
Well, I know. I've actually, you know, it's interesting. Just before the pandemic, so like January, February 2020, I was actually in a panel with the Screen Actors Guild
oh wow.
to talk about deepfakes and actors and sort of what their problem is there. Now, what's interesting is that it hasn't really affected them as much as they thought it was going to affect them.
It will.
It will.
It will.
It will. Their main concern was it was going to, you know, they were going to use that to give false information for the election. Turns out you just need to lie, and that's fine.
Yeah, just straight up lie.
Just straight up lie works just as easily. But the thing that's interesting is, like, you know, how this is going to affect believability and stuff like that. What do you think about that? Like, you know, how authentic is it what you're seeing?
Man, I totally agree with that, and I don't really have any answers, but I do know that we are in for some trouble.
Right.
You know, the other day, you know, one of the things that's in the Visions of Chaos thing is a voice or a text to voice thing.
I saw
and
that.
You can set up like all these different people. So I found a hot sounding girl voice, and I typed out this thing. Hey Meats, you're the most amazing guy in the world, and I've been watching you from afar.
Right.
And you're just the best person in the world. And I played it to my girlfriend, like,
Right.
hey, I just got this voicemail. You know, she totally bought it 100% that someone was like spying on us, like looking through the fence and all this stuff.
Right.
It sounded so realistic. You know, she's always my litmus test. You know, I show her stuff first and see if
she's no BS.
she can instantly tell everything. But this one was like, oh, whoa, she was laughing. She's like, what an idiot, you know.
Right.
But she totally bought it. So yeah, we have some major things coming up that you're basically not going to believe anything that you see.
Right.
So how do we prove it now? So that's the big question.
Yeah.
But I do think that, you know, we always have solutions. You know, that's just the way the world's work. Some big problem comes up, we find a solution. Another problem, we find a solution. It gets sanded off, you know.
It's interesting. I'll put a link in this in the podcast notes. There's a guy. I did a podcast with someone else named Wael, and he's dealing with specifically forensics to deal with that stuff, to try to identify some of that stuff. So.
Yeah, I'm just blown away. It's like right now the entire world is going to change. You know, GPT-3, I can't talk, is one thing, but the version 4 of that is supposed to be upcoming, that's the one that they're saying is just going to like change the world.
Right.
But I'm just tripping out that artistry was the first one to really come out and to create these conversations, you know, to be like, okay, there's something real that's going to take my job. You know, my entire life, I'm like, oh, well, the AI will never take my job. I do creative work and I do artwork. That's something it'll never do. Yeah, I can do recipes for you or whatever.
Right.
But it's just so strange that was the first thing that really popped up and became like the conversation.
Yeah.
But so.
What's interesting to me, honestly, the one that really sounded the alarm is when ChatGPT started to become big and everyone started using it. And by the way, they're spending so much money on GPU just to run it.
Oh yeah.
They're spending like millions of dollars a day just to have it running.
I'm sure.
But it was Google. Google did Code Red. Basically, their entire business model, Google search, is threatened.
Yeah.
Right? And so
Careful
now
what you want to find.
it is very interesting that, you know, that one of the most fundamental things of the internet, Google search.
Yeah, and
is
it
threatened
really
by an
is.
AI.
Yeah, definitely. They're going to have to switch their whole business.
Right.
I heard that Microsoft is going to start integrating.
Into Bing.
Yeah.
Which is like, no one really took Bing seriously until now. Honestly.
They
Sorry,
had to
Microsoft,
do it.
but seriously.
Yeah,
you
they
know?
had to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so many things that it's like so many questions that need answers that are coming up, you know, right now. So it's like artists are worried about art right now, but man, every other thing in the world can, you know, is going to change along with it.
It's going to be disrupted.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, right now it's art and it's the big conversation, but there's going to be so many AI that does different things that really only artists are going to want to use, you know, the art AI, you know.
Sure.
You're going to have to, unless, you know, people are doing little piecemeal stuff. But, you know, I've always said that, you know, if there's a new technology that makes it so that anybody can create like an image and artwork, then the real artists, the true artists, the people that train and live the life of an artist, are going to take that and do something much, much better. I don't know what it is yet, but they're going to take that information and be able to combine it with other tools using hardware that most people don't have. It's the same thing we've always done as professional artists. That's what makes us professionals, is our equipment usually,
Sure.
So there's going to be equipment that, unless you really want to do this stuff, you're not going to be able to afford or have, and it's going to be training that, just like everything else, to figure out how to really use and control this stuff. So even though I know for a fact there's going to be a lot of jobs lost, I do feel like there's other jobs that are going to fill their places, and it's all about being positive, I think, and trying to, you're going to, right now, it's a shakeout,
I will tell you this, which I think is fascinating to me, and this is just from my point of view. I don't think the world has been more interested in art than now. Ever.
Yeah,
no one
that's
gave a
true.
crap about
Yeah.
art until now.
Yeah.
Now suddenly,
It's the hot.
and I'm saying that honestly, like, there is more art being shown on the internet than has ever been shown in the past.
Yeah.
By orders of magnitude, hundreds
Oh,
of
yeah.
times more.
Which dilutes it. But
It dilutes it, but it's that's what everyone wants to see,
Yeah,
right?
it's interesting.
The other thing that I also think is interesting is that before this transition, art was massively derivative. It was always the same.
especially digital art. It's the same
art was
stuff
the
over and
same
over
stuff
again.
over and over again, and people were literally just copying each other.
Oh yeah, yeah. You look at ArtStation. If you looked at ArtStation before this all
I
blew
call
up,
it the chicks with sword station.
yeah, and it's either a robot or chicks with swords or
Right.
whatever. There's like 5 different things that people do over and over again.
It was all great. It was all great.
It's excellent, but no one's breaking new ground. Really, you're just kind of doing the same thing. And in fact, that's my whole thing, is that I really would petition, if I had my way of doing it, I would cut off anything done after 1998 from these training models, because the main artwork, all the masters of all these thousands of years, train on that the same way that we did. The digital artists basically are taking all that stuff and just remixing it. So to me, it's not needed.
Right.
Because it's already a synthesized thing, as I took from that artist.
Well,
all these books back behind me, I can take and
Technically,
put.
couldn't you do that? If you looked at something like a stable diffusion thing, couldn't you technically say, only use the data from 1998 before?
That would be freaking awesome if that was a possibility. I don't think there's any direct way to do it. You know how I do it, that I try to stay ethical, is I just literally don't put another artist's name. Sometimes I'll put dead artist names in there, like Giger. I couldn't resist prompting Giger's name in my airbrush artwork.
Sure.
That's what because he's just such a part of me. So it's
Right.
like, to get my style almost, I can just, I can take the artists that
Right.
are dead that I took from,
Yep.
and all of a sudden I have my style. And that's what I think, would be a great way to do it, because then, all of a sudden, you're using the dead artists that we've always done, art school, all that. You repaint other artists, you just do master copies over and over again. That's how we've always done it. And I think that would make it so that, people would feel better about it,
I think this has always been the case. I mean, people copy each other. I will say that, like, they're copying each other, but at the same time, these particular models are profiting off the copying, as opposed to the inspiration that we do, right? Like, if I'm going to do a zoom dolly, I'm not going to get sued by the Hitchcock Foundation, right?
Yeah.
But I clearly am inspired by Hitchcock, right? So I think that that's something to sort of think about. But listen, I think this is great. We're actually well over an hour, and it's been a really great
Time
conversation.
flies.
It's been really great. I think there's a lot to be talked about.
Yeah.
I think that there's. I'm sure 6 months from now, I probably will end up back here again.
Good.
And so we can
Yeah,
do this
open
again,
invitation.
because it'll be a completely
Yeah.
different conversation.
This whole thing might be burned down. The AI might have destroyed my entire lot right here. And it's like we're hiding, shivering, like looking for the drones to go over. I don't know. But, it's just my final thing is just for people to stay positive and try to find ways. Right now there's a shakeup. Like, the whole boards, the whole game board got tossed on the ground.
Right.
People that were sitting playing that game that thought they'd be sitting there forever, now are going, okay, I might not have a chair anymore. The people that are going to have the chairs are the people that are going to fight with the tools that they have, and just go for it and do it. Just the same way artists always have done it.
Right. I think you're right. I think it's going to be very interesting. I still think there's got to be more conversations on how do we deal with this so that we all feel comfortable. I think that I don't think it would have had, if we started with an ethical way of doing it, I don't think it would have happened. I think we need to break the ethnicity to realize, whoop, that's a line.
Yeah, there needs to be court cases.
Yeah, there needs to be court cases.
There really does.
Okay, and how do you feel about the court cases? You feel you'd support those and you'd be behind some of that?
1000%.
Okay.
And you know, it's like if it turned out that these companies are doing something completely unethical, you know,
Right.
I would try to find a way I wouldn't use their product. You
Right.
know, that's because I'm an artist. I support artists. You know, so I don't want to be the stealing guy, and that's kind of what has angered me is like people like not directly but indirectly calling me a thief. Basically, AI art is thievery, and that's literally all I've done like this last year is AI art. So, you know, they're calling me a thief, so it makes me fight back. Like, no, this is how it works. I'm not a thief.
Right.
You know, I do it a certain way. But
Okay, first of all, thank you, because the problem I've had mostly with that part of the conversation, although I do want to find a way to support those artists, I do believe that it's not black and white, as they say. And there's a lot of gray in between that, and that needs to be explored. Now, have there been areas which definitely have had ethical problems? I absolutely agree with that, but I don't think it can be said anything AI is stealing, everything else is not.
Not at
because if you look at the way Photoshop has been developed, all of those tools, some of the in-painting tools in Photoshop are trained on your photographs.
Yeah. So that goes back to my whole, like, you might give up a little bit, but you get a lot back.
Right,
That's
yeah.
a lot back.
So, all right, well, thanks so much, Meats. I appreciate
Yeah,
it. It's been a lot of fun, and I will be back. And thanks for inviting me out to your amazing place.
Always.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.